You have no reason to be upset. You better change your attitude. Cheer up. You'll get through this. Look at the bright side. I understand what you're going through. This is what I did when I went through something similar. I know what you mean. I hate when that happens. What's your emotional heritage? All right, welcome back. So let's pick up from where we left off from last week's discussion about emotional heritage. But first, let's talk about bids or bidding. Bids are going to be things that we talk about in the future, but it's good to have an idea as to what we're talking about when we're talking about emotional philosophies. It's going to help us understand our emotional heritage. So what is a bid? A bid can be a question, a gesture, a look, or a touch. It's any expression that says, I want to feel connected to you. And how you respond or react to others' bids might illustrate your emotional heritage. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's dig in to the various philosophies a little bit more than what I talked about last week. So remember, we're on this spectrum, disapproving on one side, approving on the other, both not so great. And then you have a couple variations in the middle, but one of them is definitely going to be better. So let's talk about disapproving. It sounds like you have no reason to feel that way. You better change your attitude. Or just plainly, calm down. How we respond to bids, meaning how we respond when someone is bidding to us, is, in this philosophy, it's a turning against or rejecting that bid. And we'll talk more about that later on. And what this sounds like when we're responding to these bids is something like, I don't want to hear about it. This type of philosophy leads to avoidance of personal and emotional connection. It encourages members to avoid or hide any intense feelings, especially the difficult feelings. Now we're on to the dismissing or discouraging emotional philosophy. So what this sounds like is, cheer up, you'll get over it, or there's no need to get angry about it. It's kind of dismissing like that. And how we respond to others' bids is we turn away or we kind of ignore their bids. Something like, not right now, or I can't handle this right now. This leads to less emotional connection. So if we are talking about someone else, they're going to connect with us a little less and less, depending on the severity or the intensity of this. And this also discourages members from paying attention to their difficulty feelings. All right, coaching, encouraging. This is the one that we want to better perfect in our lives. And the way that this sounds when we are responding to someone else's bid is, I understand how you feel. Let me help you. Or, this is what helped me when I went through something similar. And what that means is that when someone comes to you with an emotion, we tend to take it to this point of where we're helping them, coaching them along. All right. This is categorized or called turning toward the bid. We're turning toward with guidance, examples of coping, etc. What this does is leads to healthy personal and emotional connection with others. So if we were raised with this type of emotional philosophy, we are going to be one that connects emotionally and personally with other people more easily. What this does is it encourages us to, or members, to accept, respect, and honor not only our emotions, but others as well, even the difficult ones. All right, the last philosophy on the opposite end of the spectrum is the laissez-faire or the approving emotional philosophy. And what this sounds like is, I understand what you're going through. It can be tough. Or, that's okay, you'll get through it. Or, you know what? That's really upsetting. And what this is it's validating, but it's just kind of ending there. And so how we respond to other bids kind of sounds like this acceptance with validation, but without guidance. So that's still a turning toward the bid, but it ends there. No guidance, no mentoring, no teaching, no coaching, nothing like that. Now this might lead to more personal connection, but it is not as guaranteed, of course, as the coaching. And what this does is it encourages members to accept their own and others' feelings in all intensities. Emotions are okay, period. All intensities, even sometimes the behaviors behind them. So let's talk about how these philosophies turn into our heritage. So heritage is something that is handed down from the past, like traditions or rituals. And emotional heritage is kind of the same thing. It's how we cope with or respond to our emotions or even experiences. So some examples: disappointment. We might respond with stonewalling or degrading someone. Anger, we might be hurtful, having a temper, raging, or we might use assertiveness with some honest expression. Love, touch, talk, gifts, complimenting, fun. So fun can be silly, humorous, or just playful. Grief, sorrow, anger, fear, denial, or acceptance and patience. Criticism. So we can personalize, we can be vengeful, we can have anger or hurt. Failure. We can have or respond with anger, blame, fear. We can give up or we can endure. All right, I also feel like it's important to bring up something when talking about our emotional heritage. So I've shared very much that this has something to do with how we've adopted or inherited behaviors and philosophies about emotions in general. But it's important to recognize that there are what Judy Gottman calls enduring vulnerabilities. So what this might be is that someone has gone through something traumatic. Trauma is a really good example. And that may not be something that how they responded to their trauma is something they inherited. It's something that happened to them. And, well, we don't have a textbook or a manual on how to respond to trauma. So someone may do the best that they can in handling this trauma. And this then comes with them, and now we're dealing with trauma responses. And what that means is that someone's had this traumatic experience, and then events or relationship challenges, communication styles, etc., come along through their life, and it sparks some of these trauma responses in them. They may feel like, the individual, when we can go on one side, very extreme, and that individual is talking to them in the very same way that their abuser did. It could be something a little more deep and difficult to see, and that has to do with maybe rejection, right? Maybe they were raised verbally abused, or emotionally abused, or just really tormented, picked on by family, or bullied in school, or what have you. And now you come with some sort of, even just slight criticism can be very sensitive to them, because that might be essentially a trauma response. So don't forget, this might be influencing someone's emotional heritage. So our heritage is the set of practices and rituals, essentially, with how we respond to our emotions as well as others' emotions. The philosophies are the beliefs that kind of come with us. So we can come into these relationships with these heritages and philosophies or beliefs, and this can affect how we respond to our own emotions, how we communicate our emotions, how we respond to others' bids, etc. So this could also open a discussion about love languages, right? They certainly apply. So these sets of beliefs and this heritage can inform our experience with how things happen or when things happen. So these set of beliefs and practices, the heritage, can inform us of how to respond to each other in a relationship, especially during some challenging times, whether it's an event, whether it's a disagreement, etc. So imagine if a relationship, if each partner was raised in these differing philosophies and heritages and brought them to the relationship, they might communicate very differently and interpret or assume those things differently. They may bid or respond to bids much differently. They may have different love languages, different values, things that they value in that relationship or value in how they express or receive their love language. And it may influence how they demonstrate or communicate love, for example. So someone that was raised in the laissez-faire or approving emotional philosophy likely grew up not learning how to regulate their emotions very well. Their partner, let's say, may have been raised in a very disapproving environment where they likely grew up learning how to regulate emotions as if they were bad, to stuff them down or invalidate them. Now, that doesn't mean that they have learned to regulate. That's just their very limited form of regulating their emotions. So these two individuals come together in this relationship and struggle occurs, whether, again, it's an argument or some sort of event, and they struggle to accept each other's emotions as they both are experiencing this difficulty together. One might be handling this with fear, maybe some sort of anger or blame, and the other may be shutting down, maybe stonewalling, or maybe they're just spending some time trying to think through this and trying to not take an emotional response. So this is where communications can break down based on their emotional heritage. So the struggle with this is that we find that people in relationships that maybe have these differing philosophies come to the table with their belief that their heritage, the way they respond, is the right way. Now, I've certainly come from my own heritage, and I came to my relationship, my marriage, and I'm like, well, but this is better, right? We're expressing our emotions, or I'm expressing my emotions. Yeah, I'm angry, and this is okay. But when my wife is on the opposite side, maybe she's dealing with anger differently, and I want to talk about it, but she wants to kind of take this slowly, and maybe even on one side, a little bit of that stonewalling. Then you've got this massive clash. You're trying one to force the other to do it their way, the other one saying, no, this is the better way of doing it, and now you're stuck in this cycle. So how do we change this? First, I kind of just called it out. The right way, right? This is not the right way of doing things. There might be on this maybe a better way of communicating it, is a good, better, and best. But even then, we can get stuck in those snares of, well, this is then better. My way is better. It's just a different way of saying my way is right. So that may not work very well. But maybe finding some of those things that, especially on these opposite sides of the philosophies, coming to this conversation and saying, well, let's meet somewhere in the middle. Yeah, there's certain struggles with coming with a disapproving attitude or philosophy versus approving. Hey, I'm okay in expressing my anger. Communicating that, hey, this isn't okay for me. Look, this seems it's too much for me to handle. Let's step back a little bit. Let's take it slower. I'm listening. So that's one of my first tools that I use is I'm listening. I'm listening to you. Just use your words rather than maybe the intensity of those emotions. Another way of approaching this might be I know that in the past I've heard of people using like a talking stick or a talking stuffed animal or something like that. And that might be a little silly, but hey, if you want to try it or if you're using that with children, that's great. But taking time to listen to the other, knowing that, hey, this is my turn to talk, but there's got to be some limits, right? You might have someone that tends to filibuster their partner with like, oh, I'm talking, right? So setting some sort of limits into how often or how long you communicate without being cut off or without cutting your partner off. So there might be some communications. Hey, you know what? We're going to take 5 minutes, speak your mind, share, but hey, we're going to work within some boundaries. And they've got to be reasonable boundaries. Boundaries that say, hey, you can be angry. You can even maybe raise your voice, but that doesn't mean yell. So coming with this type of communication where, hey, I'm safe, someone's going to listen to me, then I'm going to express my emotions a little more carefully so that I don't lose this opportunity to be heard. So how can we use a coaching philosophy within our partnership or relationship? Now, this is quite the discussion that we won't be able to cover, but I have some examples of what coaching might look like. One big red flag is to avoid the question why. I don't like the question why. I try. Now, I'm not perfect. I can't say I don't use the question why unless, right? But I really try not to use the question why unless I'm using it for a purpose, right? I'm challenging someone's thinking because that's what it's doing. It's challenging someone's thinking, their behavior. Why did you do that? So really try to avoid why. Now, I understand that when we ask someone why did you do that, we're really asking what was going on. What was it about the situation that led for you to do this or feel this way, what have you. So opening up the conversation to exploring it a little bit more. Why comes off very argumentative or challenging, so we're going to try to avoid that. But what we want to do is actually understand. We want to ask and listen to understand from maybe where they're coming from. And then to listen actively. So that is where we start with a coaching philosophy, is getting to understand where they're coming from. And then with that, it's, of course, much like some of the others, laissez-faire, there's validation in how others respond emotionally. So validation is important, but then there's got to be the what then or what now. So when we validate someone, yeah, I hear that's got to be frustrating. That's validation. But we don't want to end there. It might be, what else might be going on? Or tell me about something else that might have been frustrating to you before going into this. And this might be something difficult to do unless you have some real solid history and trust within the relationship. Yeah, maybe you still struggle with communication, but maybe there is still trust nonetheless. So another way that we can take this coaching approach is to, when we've identified someone's struggle, right? We can take this, instead of saying, giving advice, right? We tend to want to give advice. You know what? You should do this. You know what will work? If you try this, just try that out. That's advice. And that tends to come off pretty abrasive, invalidating. So when we kind of want to give advice, I like to say, well, you'll notice that it's coming from somewhere like, oh, I feel like this would work for them. And so what you can do is share your experience of why you feel like you have some sort of advice to give. And that might be something like, you know what? I went through something similar, and this is what I did. And then you share your experience. Share your story. That can be really powerful. Sharing your story is talking about you, what you did, and you're not saying to someone, you should do this. However, this can get a little challenging because sometimes when someone else is sharing or, expressing their feelings and they're maybe feeling a little vulnerable and you come back and talk about yourself, they may not want to hear that. They also might smell a little bit of advice. They might sense that you're trying to give them advice. I've certainly had that before. Oh, I know what you're doing, or you know what? Just because you did that doesn't mean it's going to work for me. And then the other thing is that, well, you're kind of talking about yourself and taking the focus off of the other. So they may not like that. Another way that we can do this, maybe more effectively in those situations where they're not open to hearing about what you did, is if there's some history, some knowledge of what that person has gone through already in the past, where they've been able to accomplish or overcome something, sharing some of that. You know what? I saw that you did this when, you went through something. Or you know what? I remember when you handled something similar and you did this really well. It can be very validating of what they're feeling, but also validating that they have the ability to do it. All right, so that wraps up emotional heritage. This is just a taste of what this really means, and it's pretty vast. If you wanted to look into this a little bit more, learn a little bit more about your own emotional heritage and emotional philosophies, check out Dr. John Gottman's book, The Relationship Cure. There's questions in there. There's actually little quizzes that you can go through. It's one of my favorite books. A lot of this information that I got was pulled from my experience in practicing that and working with people using some of these concepts with clients. So thank you very much. I appreciate you guys watching. Don't forget, like and subscribe, please, and share this video with others. Have a great day.